Hello everyone, now we are going to talk about the brain. We have previously mentioned and explained the brain anatomy. Now we are going to go to the scary part, the brain physiology. So let's start with the cerebrum. We have previously talked about the cerebrum. Here you can see in this picture the full brain, except it's the left hemisphere of the brain, and all this is the cerebral cortex. This is the cerebral cortex of the brain that contains the many anatomical parts that we have already mentioned, and it contains the nerve centers for thought, personality, the senses, any voluntary movement. All this are included in the cerebral cortex. Now let's explore part by part here. Let's start with the frontal lobe. We previously mentioned that the brain composed of 4 lobes. We have the frontal lobe, we have the parietal lobe, we have the occipital lobe, and we have the temporal lobe. Let's start with the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe are found in the front of your brain. That's obvious from its name. So the main function of the frontal lobe is consciousness. Consciousness is the major player in the frontal lobe. It is the area of the brain that creates feelings of self-awareness and where you experience emotions. You come up with ideas, you connect thoughts together, and even if you face a mathematical problem, you can also use the consciousness in the frontal lobe to solve these mathematical problems. Cool, right? Okay. Also, it contains an area that inhibits inappropriate actions. So, being polite in front of women and being gentle is controlled by your frontal lobe. It's how you behave in the social community. Also, it contains something called the motor cortex. As you see here, it's part of the frontal lobe. So the motor cortex communicates with another cortex in the cerebral cortex called the sensory cortex, which lies behind it. This is the sensory cortex. But for now, we are going to talk about the motor cortex. The motor cortex is a specialized area that is involved in muscles movement. So it controls muscle movement. And it's devoted to many things, many muscles, control of muscles such as face, mouth, hands. All this is controlled through the motor cortex. Now we have finished the frontal lobe. Let's go to another lobe. Let's take the parietal lobe. So for the parietal lobe, the main function of the parietal lobe, it controls the sensations. Many sensory receptors exist in the parietal lobe, including pain, including temperature, including pressure. All these are sensory receptors that exist in the parietal lobe. Also, in the parietal lobe, there is an area that gives you spatial awareness. So, being in a defined space, those who have phobias in closing space also have a problem in their parietal lobe. So, when you think of turning to pick up something in this area, let's imagine together, put something behind you and turn around to pick that something. You will remember where this thing was. That's thanks for your parietal lobe. Furthermore, the parietal lobe are also involved in vision. It's also involved in movement and making mathematical calculations as the temporal lobe. But these are secondary functions. So the parietal lobe, we've talked about the sensations. These are the primary functions. There exists a specialized area called the sensory cortex that I've mentioned 2 minutes ago. The sensory cortex, that is the specialized area that controls the sensations of the parietal lobe, like touch, pain, and temperature, and so on. A large proportion of the sensory cortex is mainly devoted to interpret sensory information coming from the sensory receptors, highly sensitive receptors in your skin, for example, in your lips, genitals. These are highly organs that contain sensitive sensory receptors. The left side, this is an important information. The left side of the sensory cortex receives information from the right side of your body. So don't get confused. The right side of your body contains organs, and This right side corresponds to the left side of the sensory cortex, and vice versa. So the right side of the sensory cortex receives information from the left side of your body, and it's communicating with the motor cortex, which lies in front of it. That's for the parietal lobe. Let's move to another lobe for the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is situated at the back of your brain, and the main function of the occipital lobe is vision, interpretation of various kinds of visual information, such as color, such as light, such as movement. All these are interpreted by the occipital lobe. And same as the sensory cortex, the left occipital lobe processes information from the right eye, and the right occipital lobe processes information from the left eye, and vice versa. So the connection between both lobes allow to share this information and create one image, what your both eyes see. That's creating the 3D view. Finally, last but not least, your temporal lobes that sit at either side of the brain. They are involved in hearing, speech, and memory. And memory is one of the major players in the temporal lobe. The hearing center in the temporal lobe recognizes sounds and determine what if the tone is loud, if the pitch is high. That's why when your girlfriend, for example, screams next to you, thanks for your temporal lobe, you get scared. Hopefully that doesn't occur very often. Your temporal lobe plays also a role in the storage of memory. So when you remember memories 20 years ago or something, that's thanks to the temporal lobe. Hopefully good memories, not bad ones. Also, there is a specialized area for understanding languages. So those of us who can speak many, 5 or 6 different languages, that's thanks to their temporal lobe. Maybe they're taking steroids for the lobe or something. Of course, I'm kidding. Don't take my words for granted. People who suffer brain damage to this area understand what is being said to them, do not understand, what is being said to them, and unable to put together meaningful sentences. Okay, that's for the cerebrum. That's the largest part of the brain. Now let's move to the diencephalon. The diencephalon contains something very important. It is the limbic system. The limbic system is a ring-shaped collection of structures and plays an important role in the expression of instincts, drives, and emotions. The part that make us sad, that make us happy, that make us angry, that make us hungry, all these are controlled by the limbic system. So the limbic system has many different parts. First, we have here, shaded in yellow, the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum, we discussed it earlier in the anatomy of the brain. It is the area that separates your left and right cerebral hemispheres. So some hemispheres have specific functions, and the corpus callosum, one of its functions is to control what hemispheres are expressed. Let's move to another part, the thalamus. Okay, the thalamus is one of the major areas in the limbic system. It's a station for receiving the sensory information from other sensory receptors in the body, and it's sending them to the appropriate region for processing. So it's like receiving the information and sending them for the processors, the same as in a regular computer. It's responsible for letting your brain know what's happening outside your body. So if you are going to, for example, take a walk and you recognize your surroundings thanks to the thalamus area. Now let's move to another area. It's the hypothalamus. Maybe you've heard that name a lot. The hypothalamus is playing an vital role and necessary role in keeping conditions inside your body constant. And that we have a name for this process, it's homeostasis. Maybe you've heard that for the people who has biological backgrounds. It's doing this by regulating many different variables, such as temperature, such as thirst and hunger, and among other things. So when you are hungry, when you are thirsty, and you can't stand it, blame it to the hypothalamus. It also controls the release of hormones from the nearby pituitary glands. So if any one of you studied the menstrual cycle, for example, it contains a lot of hormones that is associated with pituitary and the hypothalamus. Let's move to its partner, the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is the master gland in our body. It produces many hormones, and one of them are the sex hormones that I've previously mentioned. Now let's move to the hippocampus. The hippocampus, as you can see here, is essential for laying down memories and regulating emotions. So if you remember something 10 days ago or 20 years ago, you will remember it thanks to the hippocampus, and people who have diseases such as Alzheimer's suffer from damage in this area. Your amygdala. Okay, your amygdala is one of the major parts in the limbic system. It is responsible for generating negative emotions. So it's bad. It's bad, it's bad, it's bad for let us being angry, let's being sad, let's being afraid and disgusted. So these emotions are controlled by the amygdala. So blame it to the amygdala, but if you want to feel happy, you have to inhibit the amygdala. So keep yourself busy. Try doing something else. If you feel sad, if you feel happy, if you feel angry, if you feel nervous, try doing something else. Keeping yourself busy inhibits this area and making you feel not miserable. And now let's move to the brain stem. So the brain stem is what it connects your brain to other parts, mainly the spinal cord. It's composed of 3 different parts. The first part is the midbrain. The midbrain serves as the pathway, the nervous pathway, from the brainstem to the cerebral hemispheres in the cerebral cortex, and contains many reflex centers such as the auditory reflex center and the visual reflex centers. Now let's move to the pons. The pons, as we previously stated, it's a bridge-like structure, and it connects up different parts of your brain. It's a station as well, from the medulla oblongata below, as you can see here, to your cerebral hemisphere, and it's also involved in regular breathing as well. Finally, in the midbrain, in the brainstem, your medulla oblongata acts as a station between your spinal cord and the brain. So it's what connecting the brain with the spinal cord. It's involved in regulating many things such as the heart rate, such as breathing as well, and reflex actions such as coughing, vomiting, swallowing. All these are controlled by the medulla oblongata. That's for the brain stem. Finally, we'll move to the cerebellum. The cerebellum, as you can see here, lies way back behind, is the second largest part of your brain. It's underneath the back of your cerebrum and attached to the brainstem. This is the brainstem, and this is the cerebellum. The cerebellum is our balance system. It's coordinating our muscles for precise movements, and it controls the balance and the pressure. So we have mentioned 6 minutes ago, or maybe 5 minutes ago, that the cerebral cortex in the frontal lobe, the cerebral cortex contains something called the motor cortex that coordinates the movement of muscle, while the cerebellum sends this information to the motor cortex in order to be processed and leads to the movement of muscles. So for example, if you lift a fork to your mouth, you're eating and you're lifting a fork to your mouth. The motor area, the motor cortex, controls this movement. As the movement progresses, it is coordinated by the movement of the fork to your mouth, so that you can insert this piece of food into your mouth, not your eye, not your face, not your cheek. So this is solely coordinated by the cerebellum. And mainly, that's the brain. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.